from the survivalpodcast.com. So let's start out with what the heck is a William Plomer? Well, you can be forgiven for not knowing. He was a South African / British author, so he was a British citizen that lived in South Africa most of his life. Born in 1903, died in 1973, having returned to the United Kingdom by then. He was known as a novelist, a poet, and a literary editor, and a very creative individual. And he said something about creativity that when I saw this quote, I said, I have to do this because it relates so much to permaculture and lifestyle design and everything that we talk about designing resiliency into our lives, even though that ain't what old Will was talking about. He said, creativity is the power to connect the seemingly unconnected. If you think of permaculture design, that's what we do constantly. We look at all the systems and elements of design in a backyard, on a property, etc. And we say, how do these relate to each other? So let's we start out with it. How are they connected? Whether we see it or not, first identify the existing connections. And then we ask the more important and creative question, the one that leads us to truly ingenious design. How could they be connected? How can we connect these two things that seem to not be connected with each other? And if you do that in business, in life, and in general, you have creativity. And creativity is one of the ultimate powers that a human can have. See, I was looking for a question or a quote today that was about power. I want the kind of theme of today to be power. And I don't mean the power to lord over another individual. I don't mean the power to use coercion. That is the power of weakness, is what that is. When what you're doing requires coercion and violence, what you're doing is weak. If what you're doing is actually powerful, the power speaks for itself, and people want to be part of it. No one comes to your house and says, listen, man, today, Jack's going to do another survival podcast. And if you don't tune in, then I'm going to come back with an army of men and dogs and pepper spray and capture you and hold you against your will for a week in a bad place. And then you'll get another chance to do it. And if you don't do it again, you'll go away for longer, right? You choose to listen to this show because you enjoy it. Because there's power in knowledge. Because when you gain information from myself, my guests, my expert council members, you have more power in your own life. You're able to take those pieces of information and kind of Jeet Kune Do it. I hope anybody listens to the show. That's what you do. You go the Jeet Kune Do style of Bruce Lee. You take what is useful to you and you leave the rest behind, and then but that's just half. Then how do you connect them? That's power. What is greater than the power of creation? For all the things that we assign to God as powerful, what is more powerful than creation itself? Now, I'm not talking about being equal to God. I'm talking about co-creating. Sometimes we co-create living systems. Sometimes we create artificial systems. But in all things, if we create something that influences any other living being, we have joined in the power of creation. What could be more powerful than for something not to be, and then for you to examine what could be, and then for you to connect things that seemingly are unconnected? And now a thing is that wasn't. Really think about that. The place we diverge from the power of God, if you believe in such things, is that we can't create something from nothing. We can't just, there's nothing and now there's a thing. What we can do is there isn't a thing, but there are these other things, these other thoughts, these other actions, these other materials, these other beings, all of the things that exist, and we can interconnect them in a way that makes a new thing from things that were. That's why we're not there, right? To say that we are co-creators is not in any way a blasphemy, no matter what your faith or religion is, because it has that fundamental limitation. But it is still extremely powerful. I really want you to understand as you listen to the experts today talk about different things you can do, something that is so simple and mechanical as sharpening a blade. It's still power. Because at one time there was no such thing as a blade. So someone looked at a sharp rock and said, this can be a blade, before there was a word blade. and simply used what was to slice. Then somebody else said, well, there's only so many of them laying around that are already perfectly designed for that. So if we chip away at a piece of rock, we can make a blade intentionally. And then people figured out, well, if we can do that, maybe there are certain materials of rock or natural glass like obsidian that are even better for a blade. And that became a thing. And then somebody said, if we don't want to cut the shit out of ourselves when we're using this thing that we now call a blade, we need a handle. And then we learned about metal. And somebody took the thing that didn't seem related to the stone knife that existed probably at that point for millennia and said, this piece of metal, if pounded, if changed in form, can become a better, stronger blade. And then somewhere along the line, somebody said, hey, look at all this grass. We need to cut it. They made something like a sickle or a scythe. And a new thing was formed. Then somebody said, hey, we could take this sickle or scythe and mechanize it as things began to progress. And we had the idea that like a wheel could turn a gear, that could turn a sprocket, that could turn another thing. And power could be transferred. And the first mechanized harvesting equipment, and they were sickle harvesters, was invented. And eventually somebody said, hey, I can make a motor that will burn ethanol or gasoline, and it will move a piston up and down, and it can move a wheel. And somebody said, hey, if you can do that, that motor could spin a sickle, but that doesn't really make sense. And a lawnmower blade, the first lawnmower blade, at some point had to be created by connecting two things that were seemingly unconnected. Or in this case, dozens of things that were seemingly unconnected until somebody said, I will make a thing that isn't there from the things that are, through connecting them. The power that we have in all the world, every bit of actual power that we have, and again, though it's used for this, right? But not the ability for one human to dominate another human, but all the power we have to build, to improve our lives, to feed ourselves, to provide things for future generations through our actions today. All of it stems from the creativity and the power it gives us when we connect the seemingly unconnected. William Plomer.